The icy wind cut through the Ardennes forest, whipping snow across the shattered roads of Bastogne. The air smelled of damp earth and burning diesel, and the distant rumble of artillery rolled through the valley like thunder. Soldiers huddled in foxholes, their frostbitten hands clutching rifles as desperation hung in the frozen air. For the men of the 101st Airborne, this was no ordinary winter. Encircled by German forces in the heart of the Battle of the Bulge, they were trapped, outnumbered, and facing a fate that seemed all but certain. Yet, somewhere beyond the snow and chaos, the mind of General Dwight D. Eisenhower was racing through maps, reports, and the fragile threads of hope. By December 1944, Eisenhower was already no stranger to monumental pressure. As Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, he had orchestrated the D-Day invasion, endured the costly campaigns through France, and now faced Hitler's last desperate gamble. Intelligence reports were grim. German panzer divisions were advancing rapidly, roads were blocked with wrecked vehicles, and the weather had grounded air support. Bastogne, a small Belgian town, had become a strategic choke point on the Ardennes line. If it fell, the entire Allied front could crumble. But Eisenhower wasn't one to panic. He had learned, often at the cost of thousands of lives, that calm decisions in the face of chaos could change the course of the war. Meanwhile, in the thick of the Ardennes, the 101st Airborne was holding the town like their lives depended on it, because they did. The men were cold, hungry, and exhausted, yet morale remained stubbornly high. Brigadier General Anthony MacAuliffe, acting commander of the 101st, had already received a German demand for surrender. The note was blunt nuts, a single word, a defiant punch of humor, in the face of overwhelming odds, but it symbolized the grit of American forces. Still, the question lingered in Eisenhower's mind. How could he relieve the encircled paratroopers before the Germans crushed them completely? Enter General George S. Patton, commander of the U.S. Third Army. Patton was a man of action, notorious for his bold strategies and rapid advances. While Eisenhower carefully weighed every variable, Patton was already preparing for what seemed impossible: a 100-mile dash through snow, ice, and German defenses to reach Bastogne. For Eisenhower, Patton's audacity was both a potential lifeline and a risk fraught with danger. Could this reckless brilliance save the 101st? Or would it lead to another disaster? The decision to rely on Patton was not taken lightly. Eisenhower had to balance the broader strategic picture. Redeploying troops could leave other sectors vulnerable, winter weather could stall even the most experienced units, and the German forces were not just defending, they were actively hunting weak points in the Allied lines. Yet, Eisenhower understood the stakes. Bastogne was more than a town, it was a symbol. Holding it meant demonstrating to both his troops and the enemy that the Allies could withstand even the most audacious attacks. Losing it could shatter morale and embolden Hitler's forces at the worst possible moment. Patton's Third Army began preparations immediately, moving tanks, artillery, and infantry into position under cover of darkness and treacherous roads. The operation required extraordinary coordination. Reconnaissance units had to scout icy routes. Engineers cleared snow-blocked roads, and supply lines were stretched to the breaking point. Eisenhower watched it all from headquarters, poring over maps and intercept, knowing that every decision was now a race against time. He understood the pressures Patton faced. The harsh winter could immobilize his tanks. German ambushes could destroy entire brigades, and any delay could doom the 101st Airborne. While reports trickled in, Eisenhower's reflections revealed a complex mixture of concern and admiration he felt for Patton. Historical records, including Eisenhower's memoirs and wartime diaries, show that he recognized Patton's unique ability to combine speed, aggression, and intuition on the battlefield. Yet, Eisenhower also knew the thin line between genius and disaster. The man who had executed some of the most daring maneuvers in the European theater had to navigate snow-clogged roads and weather that could halt any advance. Would his gamble pay off? Or would the Ardennes' icy traps claim yet another American army? Back in Bastogne, the situation was becoming increasingly perilous. Ammunition was low, medical supplies were scarce, and temperatures inside the foxholes hovered well below freezing. Soldiers shared what little food they had, wrapped themselves in blankets, and tried to stay warm against the relentless Belgian winter. The constant shelling made sleep impossible, and every shadow could hide a German patrol. Yet the men held their positions, inspired by MacAuliffe's stubborn refusal to surrender and bolstered by the knowledge that relief might be on the way, though no one knew for sure when or how it would arrive. Eisenhower, meanwhile, was acutely aware of the psychological dimension of the crisis. Winning a battle was never just about territory or casualties. It was about morale. The Allies needed a decisive move that would restore confidence and break the German offensive. He had to calculate not just the logistics, but the symbolic impact of Patton's advance. Could one general's audacity lift an entire army's spirit and turn the tide of the Ardennes? Eisenhower knew the answer lay in action, but he also knew the consequences if Patton failed. As the days passed, intermittent radio reports kept Eisenhower tethered to the front lines. He studied every dispatch, troop movements, weather updates, German counterattacks. The tension was palpable, almost cinematic, like a taut wire ready to snap. Historians note that Eisenhower often spent long hours pacing maps in his headquarters, cigarette in hand, listening to the distant sounds of war carried over radio waves. It was a delicate balance of anxiety and faith, a commander witnessing both the fragility and resilience of his forces simultaneously. Finally, on December 19th, as snow continued to fall and the German grip on Bastogne tightened, Patton's Third Army began the critical push. Tanks churned through slush and mud. Artillery crews braved icy roads, and infantrymen pressed forward with relentless determination. For Eisenhower, watching these movements was a study in both hope and fear. He knew the roads were narrow, the enemy was entrenched, and every mile could bring victory or catastrophe. Each report that came in, each visual reconnaissance photo became a heartbeat in the suspenseful rhythm of the Ardennes winter. Eisenhower's strategic mind was not just calculating distances and supply lines. It was weighing human courage, judgment under pressure, and the intricate dance of chance and skill that defined war. Patton's advance was more than a military maneuver, was a test of character, endurance, and leadership. And in that frozen December, with Bastogne hanging in the balance, the question that would define the moment was simple yet profound. Could audacity, decisiveness, and sheer grit turn the impossible into reality? December 19, 1944, dawned under a gray, steel sky, the kind that seems to mute sound and swallow light. Patton's Third Army, a column of tanks, half-tracks, and infantry, began its advance toward Bastogne. Snow clung to every surface, coating the trees and vehicles, making the roads treacherously slippery. Engines roared, gears ground, and the smell of burning fuel mixed with the cold, crisp air. Every mile was a battle against nature as much as against the enemy. For Eisenhower, sitting at Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force in Versailles, France, each incoming report painted a vivid and worrying picture. The Ardennes was a maze of forests and frozen rivers, and German forces were not passive observers. They had established defensive positions, laid mines, and dug anti-tank ditches. Reconnaissance reports detailed the positions of Panther tanks, Tiger heavy tanks, artillery emplacements, and machine gun nests. Eisenhower understood that every report meant lives were on the line, but his strategic mind recognized Patton's brilliance. The general's forces were moving with speed, audacity, and a kind of disciplined recklessness that only he could manage. Meanwhile, in Bastogne, the 101st Airborne was bracing for what seemed like the final push by the Germans. Snow drifted through the gaps, in broken windows, and the crumbling walls of bombed-out buildings. Men shivered, their faces pale from cold and exhaustion, yet their eyes burned with determination. Communications were spotty, and they often relied on runners to carry messages across the snowy streets. Ammunition stocks were low, medical supplies even lower, and the wounded were huddled together in cellars or any shelter they could find. Every soldier understood the stakes. If Bastogne fell, the entire Allied line in the Ardennes could collapse. Yet there was no panic, only grim resolve. Patton's maneuvering was a masterclass in wartime logistics. His columns navigated narrow, icy roads where a single stuck tank could block the entire advance. Engineers worked under gunfire, clearing wrecked vehicles and repairing bridges to allow the passage of artillery and supply convoys. Sherman tanks moved alongside half-tracks carrying infantry, while scouts probed German positions ahead. The operation was complex, dangerous, and meticulously coordinated. Eisenhower, receiving each report, knew the risks. Every hour delayed could spell disaster, but Patton's speed and decisiveness offered a rare hope for the besieged 101st. By late afternoon, Patton's spearhead encountered heavy resistance near the outskirts of Bastogne. German forces unleashed artillery, barrages, machine gun fire, and ambushes designed to stall any advance. Tanks engaged in close combat, their cannons echoing through the forested valleys. Infantrymen dismounted to clear roadblocks, often under the threat of sniper fire. The scene was chaotic, brutal, and terrifying, Yet Patton's forces pressed on. Eisenhower monitored every message, his face often stoic, betraying little emotion, yet historian. Note that inside, he was acutely aware of the life-and-death stakes unfolding miles away. At headquarters, Eisenhower also had to consider broader strategy. Diverting resources to Bastogne could leave other sectors exposed, yet letting the 101st fall was equally unthinkable. He knew that Patton's advance was not just about saving a town, it was about demonstrating Allied resolve. The psychological impact of holding Bastogne would echo across both Allied and German lines. Each incoming report from the Ardennes forced Eisenhower to balance pragmatism with hope, strategy with faith in Patton's audacious plan. Back in Bastogne, MC Olive's men were holding their ground against constant bombardment. Snow clogged their boots, artillery shells shook the buildings, and the wounded cried out in pain. Yet, morale remained astonishingly high. Soldiers used whatever cover they could find, from rubble-strewn streets to the skeletal remains of bombed-out houses. Shortwave radios crackled with updates, but news of Patton's advance was intermittent at best. Each sound from the horizon a distant rumble. A muffled explosion was met with tense anticipation. Could the relief column reach them in time? Would the German forces crack before the Third Army arrived? Patton's push was a blend of sheer determination and tactical genius. Units split to flank German positions, using the dense Ardennes forest to conceal movements. Tanks covered infantry advances, while artillery provided suppressive fire to clear strong points. Reports show that one of Patton's key decisions was to maintain speed at all costs, even if it meant risking supply shortages or exposure to enemy counterattacks. It was a gamble, but one that epitomized Patton's operational style. For Eisenhower, watching this unfold on maps and in reports must have been a mixture of awe and anxiety, knowing that the fate of thousands rested on the audacity of one general's advance. As night fell, the Third Army neared Bastogne. Headlights cut through the swirling snow, illuminating the devastation left in the German advance. Infantrymen trudged through mud and ice, tanks churned forward with grinding determination, and artillery fire occasionally illuminated the horizon in brief, hellish bursts of light. Communications with Eisenhower remained critical. Each message provided updates on progress and obstacles, enabling the Supreme Commander to adjust his expectations and strategies in real time. The tension was almost unbearable. Eisenhower, whose leadership style emphasized careful planning, now had to trust in Patton's unorthodox methods. His report suggested deep respect for Patton's ability to execute under pressure. Yet, there was the ever-present fear of failure. A stalled tank column, an ambush, or a German counterstrike could undo weeks of planning and put the 101st in mortal danger. Each moment was a delicate balance between anticipation and dread. By the early hours of December 20th, the first elements of Patton's Third Army finally breached the outer defenses of Bastogne. Relief columns moved cautiously through snow-filled streets, engaging remaining German positions and securing supply lines. Paratroopers of the 101st, exhausted but unwavering, caught sight of the advancing tanks and infantry. Relief had arrived, but only through relentless effort, courage, and audacious leadership. Eisenhower received word of the breakthrough and noted the strategic and symbolic importance immediately. Bastogne had survived, the German advance had been blunted, and morale among Allied forces soared. The psychological impact on Eisenhower cannot be understated. The 101st survival was a testament to discipline and bravery, but Patton's successful advance was a masterstroke that reaffirmed Eisenhower's faith in decisive leadership. Historical accounts emphasize that Eisenhower was deeply relieved, yet aware that victory was never guaranteed until the last enemy resistance had been cleared. The interplay between calculated risk, individual initiative, and the broader strategy was on full display, a perfect example of Allied command in action during the Ardennes offensive. As the snow continued to fall, the soldiers of the 101st and Patton's Third Army began consolidating positions, redistributing supplies, and treating the wounded. The town of Bastogne, though battered, held strong. Eisenhower's reports from headquarters conveyed measured satisfaction. The Supreme Allied commander recognized that the audacity of one man's decision had saved thousands of lives and turned the tide of a critical moment in the Ardennes. The relief of Bastogne would become one of the defining episodes of World War II, not merely for its tactical success, but for its demonstration of courage, leadership, and the human spirit under unimaginable pressure. December 20th, 1944. Bastogne was finally seeing the first light of relief. Snow still blanketed the town, turning streets into icy, treacherous paths, but the sound of tanks and armored vehicles moving through the streets brought hope that had been absent for days. The battered soldiers of the 101st Airborne, many with frostbitten hands and bloodied uniform, looked up at the approaching figures with disbelief, their tension giving way to cautious relief. This was not just a military victory, it was a human triumph, a testament to courage, determination, and the relentless drive of leaders like Patton and Eisenhower. For Eisenhower, the news of Patton's arrival must have been a mixture of relief and admiration. Historical records indicate that while he rarely allowed himself overt displays of emotion, the Supreme Commander understood the full significance of what had just occurred. The 101st had held Bastogne under impossible circumstance, and Patton's audacious maneuver had broken the German encirclement. Maps sprawled across his desk, reports from commanders flowing in. They all confirmed what he had feared and hoped in equal measure. The Ardennes offensive had been checked, and the morale of Allied forces was restored. But Eisenhower also knew the war was far from over. Every victory in the Ardennes was a reminder of both human resilience and the ongoing peril that defined World War II. The immediate aftermath in Bastogne was chaotic yet charged with emotion. Soldiers embraced, shared rations, and tended to the wounded, while officers coordinated the consolidation of positions and resupply operations. Tanks rumbled through streets still lined with rubble, artillery crews repositioned, and engineers worked to clear damaged roads and bridges. The relief was tangible, yet tempered by the knowledge that the German threat had not vanished entirely. Patton's advance had succeeded, but only because every man involved had faced extreme danger and made split-second decisions under unimaginable pressure. In those hours, Eisenhower's thoughts likely oscillated between strategic relief and personal reflection. He understood that the outcome was not just the result of careful planning, it was the product of bold, decisive action. Patton's rapid maneuver had defied conventional expectations, turning what could have been a disaster into a pivotal success. The Supreme Commander's report suggests he recognized the rarity of such leadership, combination of daring, intuition, and disciplined execution that few could replicate. Every commander in the Allied forces understood the lesson. Sometimes victory depended not on meticulous calculations, but on courage and audacity in the face of overwhelming odds. Meanwhile, the soldiers of the 101st continued to hold Bastogne with tenacity. Frostbite, hunger, and fatigue had pushed them to the edge of human endurance, yet their discipline never wavered. Each paratrooper knew that Patton's forces were now nearby, and that survival depended on maintaining cohesion, discipline, and vigilance. The town, scarred and battered, became a symbol of resistance. Historians often point out that Bastogne was more than a strategic location. It was a testament to the unyielding human spirit during the harshest conditions of war. Soldiers had endured weeks of bombardment and encirclement, and their courage underlined the stakes of Eisenhower's decisions. The broader strategic implications of Bastogne's relief were immense. The Ardennes offensive, Hitler's last major attempt to split the Allied forces, had been blunted. The Third Army's advance demonstrated that swift, decisive action could counter even the most formidable enemy offensives. For Eisenhower, this was a validation of his leadership philosophy, the coordination of resources, trust in capable commanders, and the balance between risk and strategic necessity. Bastogne would go down in history as a turning point, not because it was the largest battle of World War II, but because it embodied the delicate interplay of strategy, leadership, and human courage. As the dust and snow settled, Eisenhower's reflections likely encompass both gratitude and foresight. Gratitude for the men who had endured unimaginable hardship, for Patton's boldness, and for the officers who had executed the relief with precision. Foresight, because the war was not yet won, and every decision still carried profound consequences. The Ardennes had reminded him and all commanders involved that war was an unpredictable, brutal test of human ingenuity and endurance. Every maneuver, every choice, could tip the scales between survival and catastrophe. Bastogne itself became an enduring symbol of defiance. The town, though battered, remained in Allied hands. The images of paratroopers in snow-filled foxholes, tanks advancing under artillery fire, and officers coordinating under extreme stress became emblematic of World War II's human drama. For Eisenhower, the successful relief represented more than a tactical victory. It was a moral triumph, proof that careful planning, bold leadership, and human resilience could overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. It was a lesson in both strategy and humanity, one that would echo through military academies and historical studies for decades to come. The final reflection on Eisenhower's mindset is subtle but powerful. He had always been a leader who combined caution with trust in his commanders. The relief of Bastogne validated that approach: careful oversight, reliance on competent generals, and faith in their judgment could produce extraordinary results. Patton's daring, tempered by discipline and logistical planning, had turned a dire situation into a triumph. Eisenhower's satisfaction, though measured, would have been profound, knowing that the risk had paid off, and that the men of the 101st had survived against incredible odds. In the quiet aftermath, as the snow fell and the guns fell silent, one could imagine Eisenhower contemplating the broader meaning of the Ardennes campaign. War was more than strategy. It was courage under fire, decisive action in chaos, and the resilience of ordinary soldiers performing extraordinary feats. Bastogne became a story not just of maps and maneuvers, but of human endurance and leadership in its purest form. For viewers today, it is a reminder that history is shaped by individuals willing to act decisively, even when the odds seem impossible. Bastogne's story also offers a lesson for modern audiences. The courage, ingenuity, and resolve displayed there transcends time. It is a testament to leadership under pressure, the value of decisive action, and the importance of trusting capable people to carry out critical tasks. Eisenhower's reliance on Patton and the success that followed demonstrates that in moments of crisis, human initiative, courage, and intelligence can tip the balance. It is a reflection on human potential, reminding us that even in the darkest moment, calculated audacity and steadfast resolve can produce extraordinary outcomes. As we look back at Bastogne, we are left with both awe and reflection. The snow-filled Ardennes, the frozen foxholes, the roar of advancing tanks, and defiance of surrounded soldiers all paint a picture of courage that transcends time. Eisenhower's careful balance of strategy and trust, Patton's audacious drive, and the 101st unyielding determination combine into a story that is both cinematic and profoundly human. It is a chapter of World War II that continues to inspire, reminding us of the stakes, sacrifice, and extraordinary leadership that defined one of history's most pivotal conflicts. So, when we ask ourselves, what did Eisenhower really think when Patton saved the 101st Airborne? The answer is layered. Relief, yes, but also admiration, respect, and an acknowledgement of the human factors that shape history. Strategy alone cannot win wars. Courage, audacity, and resilience do. Bastogne stands as a timeless example of that truth. And perhaps as we reflect on these events today, we can appreciate not only the tactical brilliance, but the profound human spirit that allowed ordinary men to achieve the extraordinary. If you've ever wondered how leadership under extreme pressure can change history, Bastogne offers a vivid lesson, and the echoes of Eisenhower's quiet but powerful reflections remind us that even in war, human courage and audacity define the course of events.